5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm John
there,
Miglosh for the Wisconsin DMA and the International Society for Strategic Marketing. And let's dig in. We got a lot to cover today. Okay. Over here. Good morning, Phoenix. Here we go. Okay, first off, I've been covering that billionaires are spending a lot of money, and already we've hit $1 billion. And 77% of that's coming from billionaires, and more than half of it's coming from Bloomberg, who doesn't seem to be showing much in the polls. As I said the other day, you know what? You can overspend. It's a good show. You might want to tune into that. You can overspend. People start to get that maybe you're shouting because you got nothing to say. Who knows? Can't say. But 36% is going to TV and radio, which I think is interesting. Only 25% to digital. Right? Now, that's maybe because Bloomberg is kind of old school, or maybe we could just say kind of old. Anybody who's older than me, I consider old. They're all old. My goodness, except me or Pete. Okay, well, let's move on. Okay, First Amendment doesn't apply to YouTube. And when I PDF'd this, it changed the entire article, which I think is interesting. So now let's go down to the browser, which could be anybody's guess what it's going to cover. That's not the right window. Yeah, it's anybody's guess, all right. So now we got to go over here. ODP is going to come up. And that one's going to come up. There we go. That's pretty good. And I don't know why that thing is. But basically, I like Prager University, I have to say, a lot. And this thing is annoying and it doesn't work anyway. YouTube is a private entity. The free speech clause of the First Amendment applies to government. Government can't, thwart free speech. Okay? I mean, in your home, you can kick somebody out if you don't like what they're having to say. And so this was interpreted by the judges as free speech right versus property right. And I read yesterday someplace on Twitter that the Constitution was all about protecting property rights. So, they went with that. And what it really says, and this is the important part, is that these media companies right now are not subject to any of the fairness doctrines that are required of regular TV stations. And thinking about it, which I hadn't really, my guess is that's why Fox News and CNN can be so biased, because they are not going over the airwaves. They're going over the cable. And now, if 5G comes in and everybody gets their internet through the airwaves, then maybe that changes. Don't know. It's interesting stuff, Maybe net neutrality would have changed it. Don't know. The bottom line is, whatever you're doing, I'm up on YouTube, I'm up on Facebook, I'm up on Twitter. Whatever you're doing is subject to the host's perspective on what you do. It's the way it is. So keep that in mind. That's why I'm on 5 platforms every day. If one gets a little testy, well, you can go to a different one if you can find me. Anyway, now to get to the real stuff that I want to get to. Okay, so let's go over to the PDF. Rid of this. And yesterday I talked a little bit about customer identity. Okay, customer identity. And, no, that's not the one. Well, anyway, I talked about customer identity and lifetime value. And what's interesting to me is that lifetime value, though it's been around for literally decades, Martin Baer really came up with it in life insurance. Though it's not new, it's gaining traction. Okay? And the tricky part is that you need to understand the costs associated with a customer's retention. And you need to view the customer's entire relationship. The reason that lifetime value works well in the reason it works well in life insurance with Martin Bear is that it was term life. And one of the things about term life is that they don't send you a letter every now and then saying how much they love you and they hope you never go away, right? That's not the way it works. They actually send you nothing. And if you don't send the proper payment, or you don't connect that payment with the proper account number, or you decide to cancel, they go, yay. Why? Because they get to keep all the money, right? They don't want you to keep it till the day you die. They want you to get rid of it because that's where they make the most money. They make 100% of it, okay? And Martin Bear said, rather than look at just the first year of the revenue stream, we have a certain decay rate. And so back years and years ago, when I used to talk to Martin a lot more, I came up with, actually John Worth came up with it. John Worth at Woodworker Supply. And I'll explain why in a minute, okay? But we call it the bathtub model. And one of the things that it was about was acquisition cost, okay? That you have to take into account the initial sales value, but you also take into account the downstream profitability. That's the way Martin looked at it. And that's right, okay? And the customer retention looks something like this. You lose, and in most cases, e-commerce or catalog, e-commerce it might be worse, but catalog, you lose maybe 60% in the period one. So you're way down here, okay? And then it's like 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. Just keeps going, okay? And so that's going to happen kind of no matter what you do. And catalogers keep mailing and mailing and mailing. But the impression you get sometimes is that this is a simple equation. And the trouble is that it's not. Okay? It's not at all simple. And the reason is that it's not one curve. It's not one point in time. And even if it were one curve, the longer you make it in years, let's say 5 years, the longer you make it, the more stable you get it. It doesn't just jump around. Year to year, things can change. Your retention rate can change dramatically. I had a client that switched dramatically into digital, and what they found was their retention rate went way down. And their downstream value went to about 1/4. They hadn't realized that. They were just happy that they were just keeping track of the cost of acquisition. And the cost of acquisition was a fraction of what they were spending in the catalog business. But the value was a fraction. And so looking at the numbers, you say, well, I had 100,000 active buyers last year. And now I have 100,000 active buyers. But digital, I've spent a third as much getting them. Okay, but they could be worth 1/4. And so you think that you're good, but so over time you get to see that pan out. And so the longer the better. The trouble is the longer the worse. Why? Because when you change something dramatically, like J. Jill or Nordstrom's changed to digital without a lot of testing, and all of a sudden they dramatically impacted the customer's repeat purchases with digital. People weren't looking at it at the same rate. The engagement is lower, and so the revenue is lower, and that's the kind of thing you see. Okay, so a long curve is better from a standpoint of analysis and stability. A long curve is worse because whatever you were doing 5 years ago, you're probably not doing now. The climate, the economic climate has changed. The competitive climate has changed. All kinds of things have changed. It's better and it's worse. Okay, now this is actual customer data from one of my clients year over year over year. And what we saw was, the decline of the first year, we only had 60% of what we had started with, like I said. And then it went 20, 20, down and, sort of leveled off at about 10. Okay. It sloped down from 10 to 20. And it did that repeatedly, except for 1 year where they just started doing a terrible job of customer retention, which was over here. They had just gone completely, like, shut down their call center and thought they could save a lot of money that way. You never know. They're doing funny things. I'm seeing that I don't have this entirely on screen, so we're going to try and adjust it real time, which is always dangerous. Okay. And maybe we can move it over. No, we're pretty much stuck. Okay. It is what it is. Okay. Now, the other thing that happens is these curves year to year overlap, and they are additive. Okay. And so one is declining, another one, you get new customers, you got acquisition, you got some of these renewing and coming up in here. So there's this flow that's happening, right? And all things being equal, you're keeping the same rough number of customers, right? And so you get a look that's kind of like this. Let's shrink it up a little so I can see the whole graph. And this is a growth. This is a company that was growing rapidly, and so in this case, it was growing. Now, this wasn't a full year, so that's why I went like that. But you can see that the proportions change through time. So there's a lot going on here. Makes it really interesting to try to figure out. You can't just apply a 5-year curve. And one of the things, that's the idea of customer identity, is we can track each customer. But the problem is in e-commerce and cataloging, we don't know when they're dead. We don't know when they go away, right? So my point here, I left Land's End for about 10 years. I started buying from Land's End in the 70s, and I went out in the early 2000s for about 10 years. I didn't buy from Land's End, and I came back in about 2010, and my password was still good, my account was still good, my history was still there, and that's probably the way it should be. And guess what? I started buying Land's End, and he's Land's End turtleneck right now. And so you don't know. All metrics would say I was gone forever, but I wasn't gone forever, right? And I had a office furniture company, and they would mail customers for 10 years because their average order was so high. So how do we keep track of it? How do we keep track of this circulating customers, where they go down and they go dormant, and then all of a sudden, they're active again, up here they go. Well, John Worth came up with this idea, the bathtub model. And I don't know if you can see this little guy, but let's pretend that your customers are in a bathtub and new customers are coming in through the faucet. Okay, simple, right? If you want to add new customers, you open that faucet, and the more you open it, the more it costs. That's money. And the bigger the flow in, right? And so you see the customers come into the bathtub and they accumulate, right? And so that's how you grow, right? And I heard a consultant not long ago say that you can't grow both profit and sales at the same time. Well, yes, you do. When you start out, you probably do. Well, maybe you finance it, but a lot of people self-finance, and this happens. You get a hot concept, and away you go. Okay? Maybe you finance pouring more money on it. But anyway, so you got a certain number of customers in here, and if you haven't started just today, then you've got there's a level to the bathtub, right? And it's full of stuff. But the problem is, and it's hard to see these little guys, but the problem is that some of them are flowing out of the bathtub. It's leaking. There's holes in the bottom. So you could put in 100,000 new customers, but the level doesn't rise by 100,000. It might not rise at all, depending on what your reactivation is. And that is the puzzle. But by looking at it this way, and we actually have a model that goes about 18 months, but we start back 5 years, and what we do is we get those flows, and instead of we have the actuals, and then we adjust percentages of renewal and reactivation and costs. And so we basically build your P&L, rebuild your P&L with ratios, which then lets us project into the future. And when you project into the future, then what you can do is you can test, what if we improve retention? What if we improve acquisition? What if we just coast? Where's the optimal? And you can actually optimize for maximum profit in whatever time window you want. It's quite interesting. But it's all based on the idea of looking at it as a dynamic flow model rather than as this decay curve, which works in life insurance, term life. It works in a one-time sale or with a subscription. That's what the author actually mentioned was subscriptions. It does work pretty well there. Although in a subscription, there's still a renewal cost often. But, it works better there because at least people's subscriptions go dormant. The problem with subscription ERP systems is they usually write over the top and only tell you who's active. And you can't tell the difference between somebody who was active 10 years ago and let it expire, but their start date is 10 years ago, and then they renew. You can't tell the difference between that person and the person that's had oftentimes a continuous subscription, because they don't usually save all those transactions, which we encourage them to do. Anyway, enough technical difficulties for today. Have a great day. I'm John Miglosh. Like and share. Hopefully you'll be smart.